The success story of post-independent India shall be seen in mammoth efforts of the state to bring transformation of one of the largest population within no time. The resource mobilization for the purpose started with the budgetary process when Shanmugham Shetty presented his first budget in 1947. As the baton was passed to John Mathai, who had been a vociferous advocate of right to property and strongly debated with Nehru in Constituent Assembly, he rightfully abolished the capital gains tax on profits of real estate transactions, justifying his right leanings. But as soon as the deck cleared for the emergence of a socialist pattern, the finance minister was found mobilizing revenue and investments for the same, introduced a super-rich tax, and scripted the establishment of the Planning Commission in 1950-51 budget. Carrying on the efforts, C.D. Deshmukh brought an overall increase in taxes in his first budget of 1951-52 to deal with the demands of planned expenditures. In his 1955-56 budget, he brought different tax exemption limits for married and unmarried individuals and created a mechanism for family allowances. Family is a recurrent theme in the budget, and its testimony is also found later in conservative Morarji Desai withdrawing spouse allowance in 1968-69 on the premise that outsiders need not know who is dependent on whom in the family. Whether it was VP Singh's expectations in 1985-86 budget that the rise in standard deduction given on income tax should be passed on to homemakers, or it was Yashwant Sinha's tweets in the budget speeches referring to the homemaker's purse, it is clear that the finance ministers have withdrawn much inspiration from homemakers' ability to bring economy in household expenditures. As the Congress became firm on the socialist pattern of society in its Awadhi session in 1955, all subsequent budgets subscribed firmly to the very idea. The capital gains tax was revived in 1956-57, and one of the most powerful budgets of independent India was presented by T.T. Krishnamachari after the second general elections in 1957. The budget saw the introduction of Nehru-Mahalanobis model and imposition of wealth and expenditure tax to achieve the objectives of the planned economy. Later, when T.T. Krishnamachari had to resign as finance minister after the Mundra scandal related to LIC, Nehru himself presented his self-proclaimed pedestrian budget in 1958-59 and imposed the gift tax, so as to make evasion and avoidance of wealth, income and other taxes difficult, and also letting the tax burden spread more equitably. The state-driven increased public expenditure testifies the very ideals mentioned by Kalidas in Raghuvamsha, eulogizing King Dalip that the king need to tax people the way sun draws moistures from the earth and to give it back 1,000-fold. The budgets of 1960s saw new challenges with respect to revenue mobilization to sustain the growth momentum, and also to deal with emergent crises associated with war, food insecurity, and agriculture and industrial development. Where Morarji Desai's budget of 1962-63 brought one of the highest increase in income tax by a whopping 72.5%, his 1963-64 budget brought imposition of a super profit tax on corporates and wealthier people. The budget under Prime Minister Shastri presented by T.T. Krishnamachari in 1965-66 tried to deal with problems of corruption, where the budget on one hand came up with the first ever scheme of voluntary disclosure of unaccounted wealth. On the other, it sought to bring the very personal austerity stance of the Prime Minister in the form of imposition of 60 to 100% import duty on imported cars, which otherwise had become a status symbol. Less to mention the fact that this was the Prime Minister who died within a year, leaving behind a loan of his second-hand car. Before the dawn of the new socialist surge and before resigning as finance minister after Indira Gandhi adopted bank nationalization policy, Morarji Desai attempted his pro-business flexes by bringing excise reforms in 1968-69 budget, by which the stamping and assessment of goods by the excise department at the factory gate was done away with. The decade of 1970s started with Indira Gandhi herself presenting the budget in 1970-71 in the backdrop of newly launched poverty alleviation and rural development programs. This was also the year of launch of Operation Flood that later brought white revolution in India. Her efforts for small and marginal farmers reflected in the tax exemption given on baby food and milk products. Besides increasing duty on prepared and preserved food, she very apologetically increased excise duty, cracking wit in her quintessential style when she hoped that the smoking community would keep up the passion to contribute more and more to the exchequer. Indira's Garibi Hatao landslide of 1971 and her oft-repeated assertion of something to be done quickly reverberated in the budget when increased government spending turned India's central budget from revenue surplus to revenue deficit. For the first time, the finance minister under Indira Gandhi, Y.B. Chavan, had to face some of the toughest challenges as finance minister from 1971 to 1975 as the economy was reeling under crisis. Because of prolonged drought over the years in late 1960s, Bangladesh war, refugee crisis and rising prices. Also, the oil crisis of 1973 literally added more fuel to the sparkles of doom that was destroying the Indian economy. Amid such a scenario, Chavan presented his black budget in 1973-74, where the metaphor indicates not only the status of the economy but also the nationalization of coal mines undertaken for uninterrupted supply of power, cement and steel industry to provide thrust to growth. 1973 also happened to be the turning point for Indian economy, as the budgets that followed till the end of emergency brought the economy back on track. The budgets of 1974-75 and 75-76 brought major income tax reforms, since this tax had been imposed by James Wilson in the first budget of India in 1860 to account for losses occurred during 1857 revolt. The marginal rates of income tax were brought down from 97 to 66%. In 1974-75 budget, there was revision of railway fares and freights, but this could not bring any ease for railway staff who went on total strike in 1974, much to the credit of trade union leaders like George Fernandez. The emergency budget of 1976-77, also called as everybody's budget, was presented by none other than the Green Revolution man himself, C. Subramaniam, who took up the cudgels to give a major thrust to the economy by taking risk of providing big boost to planned expenditure, despite risk of possibility of revival of inflationary trends which the country had tried with great difficulties.